All right, thank you, Rick. So I wanted to welcome members of the public who has joined us for our housing element workshop, a very important part of our preparation of our housing element, which is also an important part of the general plan update that we are currently in the process of. So I wanted to welcome you all here. We have members of our general plan advisory committee, staff, and consultants that are all working on this. I am shortly going to turn it over to our mayor, who will have a few things to say, our mayor, Sue Nowak. And after that, we will then turn it over to our consultants, who will give a presentation on the housing element, what we've done, the general plan and overview. And the thrust of our meeting this evening is to go over housing opportunity sites. Through this, you, the members of public, will have opportunities to provide your input and feedback on everything that we discussed this evening. So with that, I also forgot to mention, my name is Troy Fujimoto. I am the city planner for the city of Pleasant Hill. And so with that, I will turn it over to our esteemed mayor, Sue Nowak.
Thank you, Troy. And welcome everybody. Really appreciate everybody being here. And I thank my fellow council member, Ken Carlson, for being on here with me. We really appreciate everybody's participation and hope more people can join us. This is a really important aspect of our planning process. As many people know, we've been going through the general plan process for the last, well, a couple of years now with the delay with COVID. And because of the delay, we have now merged our housing element piece along with our general plan process, which I think is actually very fortuitous. We have quite a challenge ahead of us. Our RHNA allocation numbers, if people are unaware, are 1,803 units that we have to plan for or zone for within the city of Pleasant Hill. This is a significant increase from our prior cycle, which was, I believe, around 440 units. So this is quite a challenge. We understand there's going to be more scrutiny as to how sites are identified and planned for, and also our process within the city, our design guidelines and other types of regulations that allow houses to be built. So people's input is really important here for all of us. Realize it is challenging. I don't think any of us, if we had a choice, would want 1,800. And for those of you that are unaware, we did, City Council did direct staff to appeal those numbers because we felt they were too high versus the job growth expectations in the city. So that is in process, but in the meantime, we need to be moving forward with our housing element. And so this is an important step. So thank you again for all participating and welcome. And I will turn it over to Rick. Are you running this, or Darcy, or who's going to start this off for us?
I'm going to run everybody through this, and then the rest of the consulting team will be available to answer questions as they come up. So right now, we'll give you the PowerPoint up.
Yeah, I don't want to really be sucked into it.
All right, does everybody see the PowerPoint? You tell me?
Yes.
Good. All right. Well, good evening to the esteemed members of the city, staff and the council that are with us tonight, and for all the public that's joining us here. This, as we've mentioned, is an important component of the overall general plan. Now, we're currently working on the general plan update, and first off, we'll give you a little bit of an overview about where that's at right now for those that have been involved in the general plan as we move forward. But tonight, we're really going to be talking about the housing element. This is a separate piece of the general plan itself. The city is in a good position in that we're now able, due to a number of factors, to do both the housing element and the general plan update at the same time, which allows us to do a much better job of syncing up our policies and our future. We'll talk about the siting analysis that will be going on as part of this housing element and what that means. And then we're going to open it up for public questions and comments on the overall housing element, or if you have questions about the general plan update, that's fine as well. We're looking to wrap up around 7:30, so if we have a lot of dialogue, that would be great. We'll take notes of everything that's been talked about and move forward to our next steps, which we'll highlight at the end of our presentation. So as far as the general plan status update, For those of you who are involved, and we got a picture here of one of the planning charrettes we did. This was back in November of 2019, back when we were innocent and free from the coronavirus. We had a 3-day in-person workshop where we had a number of individuals from the community join us during that weekend and provide us insight on the future of the community and a look at land use alternatives specifically. That resulted in a preferred land use alternative that was brought to the GPAC. Now, GPAC stands for the General Plan Advisory Committee, and it is made up of 2 council members, 2 planning commissioners, and 1 person from Design Review Committee. And they are there to help provide a sounding board and guidance as we go forward in the development of the general plan. But throughout this, we've also been providing a chance for people to be directly involved from the community aspect. But you may say it's been since November 2019 since we had a community workshop. And part of that was due to COVID-19 and the inability to do a lot of meetings in person. And we decided to delay the project for as long as we could, but still needing to meet some of the deadlines and moving the community forward. Now, tonight's a virtual meeting, but we're hoping to be able to get back together in the future for more of the housing element and the general plan update workshops moving forward. But tonight we are having a community workshop dealing with housing sites and housing alternatives. And some of these are based on the November 2019 community charrette, but we've also had to increase some looks and some sites in order to meet the overall housing needs. So let's talk about the housing element and what it means to the community and what it is. The housing element is simply an element of the general plan. Now, the general plan is made up of a number of elements. These are like chapters of a document. So we have an element on land use and community development. We have a chapter on circulation. We have something on natural resources. We try to cover all the topics that are important to the planning of the future and make sure they're covered. Now, the housing elements are a little unique in that they have a very specific timeline from the state. And because of that specific timeline, many communities update their general plans without updating the housing element at the same time. In fact, Pleasant Hill, when we started this, was looking to do that. We developed the majority of the general plan and move through adoption, and then we'd pick up with the housing element. But because the opportunity has been presented, because the project's been delayed a bit due to the COVID-19 slowdown, we're now in a position where it was felt that we could do the housing element at the same time as the general plan. Now, currently the city's using what's called the 5th cycle, or you can think of it as the 5th time you've updated the housing element, which was adopted in April of 2015, and it runs through 2023. Now, the 6th cycle is the housing element that we'll be working on. It runs from January 15th, 2023 through January 15th, 2031. So in general, a housing element provides an assessment of both current and future housing needs. That what do we need to provide for our community? This looks at the broad brush of the needs in our community, both from an income standpoint, both from large and small families, both from constraints on people's ability to access housing, the ability to get transit facilities and commercial facilities to serve different income groups. These are all part of our assessment. And then we look at the opportunities and constraints on housing production. This can be constraints that are put on through governmental regulations. They can also be constraints that are from the natural environment, such as flood zones or high fire hazards. And then with all this, we also then come up with a goals, policies, and program set. Just like every other element in the general plan, the housing element has a set of goals, policies, and programs that are designed to address the needs that we have in the community and work to get the housing done. Now, I should point out that we're going to talk about what we need to produce as far as housing in a general sense. But when I say we, the city itself is not required to produce the housing units. The city is supposed to identify the land that can be made available to produce the housing and to make sure that it has reduced the constraints that may be governmental in nature to optimize the production of housing from both the private side as well as a nonprofit sort of aspect. Now, the strategies and programs we develop will focus on some broad areas. One will be conserving and improving existing affordable housing. That is, The resources we already have in the community, we want to make sure that they are available for future generations in the community. We want to maximize housing opportunities throughout the community. This idea of providing housing for all income levels in every part of the community is an important aspect of what the state looks for in our current housing elements. We want to look at how we can assist in the provision of affordable housing. Part of this is removing the governmental constraints, as I mentioned. Then a big aspect of this current cycle of housing elements is promoting fair and equal housing opportunities to make sure that all individuals have access to housing within the community. Now, tonight we're going to focus a little bit more on the housing sites inventory, and part of that will be looking at the housing unit potential. That is, how many units might these various housing sites produce? And all of this is about looking at the sites and if they can meet the city's RHNA, or Regional Housing Needs Allocation. That's what that acronym stands for. And we'll talk about that in just a minute, about where that came from and what that means to the community. Now, the sites that we look at for producing our housing to meet RHNA are our pipeline projects. That is, projects that have already been submitted, applications have been submitted, but may not have been approved yet, may not have been given building permits. These could be counted towards meeting our RHNA. We look at the addition of additional accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. These are small units. We'll also give you some highlights of that can be provided on existing single family or multifamily properties. We look at development of vacant land within the community. Now, there's not a lot in Pleasant Hill to look at, but we will look at what's available and how that may be built out in the future. The next two bullets kind of looking at underutilized or infill sites. These are sites that don't have their full usage on the site. We can also look at redesignated and redeveloped sites. That is the potential to take a commercial area and make it into a mixed use site, which will be a key part of our strategy going forward. And then we can also look at some of our residential and mixed use areas and look at changes of density to enhance the number of units that could be built on a project site. So when we talk about this RHNA number, we talk about several things. We have it goes from extremely low income, which is up to 30% of the area median income. Now, the area median income is based on how many individuals are in your household, so it varies depending how large your household is. If it's one person, it's a much lower number than if it's a family of 5. So it's related to that. It goes from very low, then to low, moderate, and above moderate income. Now, when we talk about our sites analysis, the extremely low, very low, and low are grouped into one category called lower income. This is what we're looking at tonight with the various sites and how they might need that. When we look at the RHNA, though, it does provide a number for what's called very low income, and that covers both the extremely low income and the very low income categories. So those are terms that get used, and as we develop the housing element, you'll see these in detail and what they mean as far as home values and affordability. So where does the RHNA, this magical thing, come from? Well, it starts at the state level, and the state provides numbers out to all the councils of government or associations of governments that are the regional governmental agencies, and in some areas to the counties and more rural areas. So for Pleasant Hill, that falls under the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG. And we talk about total units. HCD gave to ABAG the need to identify sites for 441,176 units. When we talk about the number of sites for Pleasant Hill, just to give you a little bit of comparison there. For Pleasant Hill, the total for RHNA is 1,803 units. Now, besides the big number 1,803, the numbers are also broken up by these different income categories that I just talked about. So these are the breakouts for Pleasant Hill. So the total of 1,803 is provided in a very low, low, moderate, and above moderate category. Now, the big deal for most jurisdictions in the state of California, you may understand it's been talked about that California has a housing deficit, that how California has been called in a housing crisis by some. And the state is looking to up the amount of housing that needs to be provided across the entire state. So most RHNA numbers for the sixth cycle, the one we're in right now, have gone up quite a bit. The current housing element only had a RHNA number of 448 units. Your sixth cycle, or the one that we're doing right now, has an obligation to provide sites for 1,803 dwelling units. So this is an increase of 1,355 more units than you were asked to do during the last planning period. As part of our housing element 2, we also have to bring the city's housing element up to date relative to state legislation. As well as the state's focus on increasing the number of housing units through the RHNA allocation, there's also been a lot of state legislation and new requirements that have to be addressed. In fact, there's almost 30 new state rules that apply to the housing element that we're doing now, covering everything from accessory dwelling units, affirmatively furthering fair housing, or fair housing in general is a key component. We're talking about no net loss. That is, your housing element has to keep producing the number of units we said. And if some of those don't quite produce as many units as we planned on, we have to replace those units with something else. Density bonus for certain circumstances. And then just overall the Housing Crisis Act, which provided a number of requirements on the community for meeting the needs of all income levels. So what we want to talk about tonight are housing sites. As I mentioned, a lot of these sites came out of that charrette we did back in November 2019. We've also had additional sites because we have additional needs now with this new RHNA number of looking for other places to go, and that has been helped to us by the General Plan Advisory Committee in providing some input, as well as the consultants looking through the community to identify available sites. So the build-out analysis just is trying to confirm that we have enough capacity to meet the RHNA requirement. Now, we have a little disconnect in the fact that the general plan typically looks out to a 20-year time frame, and the housing element is planning for an 8-year time frame. So as we kind of think of this from our land use standpoint, you almost have 2.5 housing element cycles, or 2.5 RHNA quantities that we have to plan for. Most communities plan for the 8-year cycle and then plan to do an update to their general plan as they get towards the next cycle. But this is something we have to address as part of the disconnect between the two planning periods. I mentioned before some pipeline projects. Now, these are projects that are currently in various stages of approval with the community, and how they get counted will depend on when they actually pull their building permits or pull certificates of occupancy. You can see we have this project called 85 Cleveland, which supports 189 units. 9 very low and 10 moderate income units. 401 Taylor has 31 units plus 6 accessory dwelling units included. And 490 Golf Club has 82 units, all of which are low income. This is a senior housing project. So those are kind of a basis that we can start off of if they all pull permits during this next cycle. As far as other accessory dwelling units, we're looking to produce 320 units over the next 8 years. This is based on the number of units that have been produced in the past and forecasting what we might be able to encourage to have happen long term. We've also looked at a set of assumed densities. As we look through the various vacant and underutilized sites, we have to look at what potential densities might occur in these sites and what's likely to happen. So for instance, if you had a designation that said you could have between 20 and 40 dwelling units per acre, we determine what we think is going to be the typical density. So perhaps it's 30 in that case, just as an example. That's not an actual category, but that's kind of what you're looking for when you look for assumed densities. And then income categories are typically judged off of the density provided. So for this region, you need to have at least 30 dwelling units per acre to be considered appropriate for low income housing. These are some bases for what we looked at and what we've done in our look. Now, as we go through these various sites, you'll see that we talk about the term mixed use in quite a few sites. And that is, a number of our sites have some existing commercial uses on them. So a challenge always is, how do you develop more housing and at the same time don't lose the commercial sales tax base that you have within the community or the commercial shopping opportunities? And mixed use is one way to do that. That is where you take the first floor of a building and you provide it in a non-residential use. Could be offices, could be commercial, things that already might exist on the project site. Then above that, you build your residential component. Now this has the advantage of providing for a higher density of housing within an urban core. It does not put housing out into existing neighborhoods, but puts them more into developed areas. You also have built-in commercial shopping opportunities for the residents of those areas. So this was an important aspect, and you'll see this on many of the sites. We use the term mixed use as being appropriate. Accessory dwelling units, these are just some general pictures from the area, not specifically from Pleasant Hill, but it kind of shows you the idea that detached is the one you might normally picture, like the top left corner, where you have a small structure in the backyard. It could also be in the front yard for that matter. An attached one is a unit attached to the primary residence. The next two are very similar, but they're typically inside the dwelling unit itself. And it just depends on the types of access, the types of interior improvements that are done to make that a more separate space. But that's where you're actually converting part of your existing structure to be used for individual units. So these are different kinds of accessory dwelling units that might be appropriate within the community. I should note that accessory dwelling units are allowed by state law, any single family designation and multifamily designation with some certain limits, but this is something the state requires that the city allow within the community. So as we look forward to our potential sites, and I'm just going to run through these, and again, these have been briefed and updated with our General Plan Advisory Committee. And tonight, kind of keep these in mind. We'd love to have your comments on it. The number of units that we have projected could be built on these sites currently exceeds the arena number we have, but we haven't gone out and chatted with each of the property owners to confirm their interest in doing some of this and find out your input as the public on the likelihood of these sites and whether they're good, bad, or indifferent kind of ideas. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the different items. So keep in mind some of these letters or names as we go through. I also want to point out that these are fairly distributed in the community. We have some on the west side of town, some on the north, and quite a few along Contra Costa Boulevard at the core areas of the community. So Project A, this was discussed in some of the public work too, and that was, can we make better use of some of the overflow parking at Diablo Valley College? Now, the college hasn't officially been approached or bought into this idea. Just like every property owner, we would need to talk with them. And this would probably be a mixture of replacement parking as well as some residential above. This is a mixed use very high designation, which allows from 70 to 100 dwelling units per acre. You'll see a few of these in our proposals. I talked about our assumed density. So in this range of 70 to 100, we assume that it might generate the 70 first cut. So this site could hold 350 units using about half of the parking lot available. Chilpancingo Park was also thrown out there as being a site. Perhaps the park is underutilized or something that could be looked at. Now, when we talked with the GPAC about this one, they recommended that this be removed from consideration. So right now, this is not part of our alternative, but we just wanted to be transparent about everything that was being considered and thought of. So that's where this one currently stands, about 2.5 acres in that location. Winslow Center, this is up at the corner of Taylor and Pleasant Hill Road. This is where the Winslow Center is located. Now this component shows a multifamily low density development at 13.9 dwelling units per acre on the typical development. So this would be a low-level apartment type development. And this would also maintain the Winslow Center in its current location with the apartments being built around it. This is Site C. Site D is the remainder of the Mangini-Delu area that's just behind the Winslow Center to the east. So we've broken this up into 3 different densities. On the eastern section, which is adjacent to existing homes, this is being looked at for 4.8 dwelling units per acre, which is very similar to the existing homes behind it. The northern section is we looked at 8.3 dwelling units per acre. Then the southern section, the small piece right behind the Winslow Center, was looking at 21 dwelling units per acre. Again, that's in a common apartment kind of complex shape. Overall, this would produce about 221 units. Looking at the 7 units that are on there would have to be removed most likely. Site E was looking at the reuse of JFK University. Now there's a couple of sites we look in here that are this commercial office educational kind of mix, and there's conversations about what do we really want to lose these buildings. So mixed use component, you can have non-residential on site, but this would look at a redevelopment of this building, whether the upper floors could be used and retrofitted for residential, or this would require a change in the building structure is still to be determined. But this also is looking at a mixed use, very high density, and that at the 70 DUs per acre assumed, this would provide for 340 units. Again, this is on top of 1 floor for a non-residential use such as commercial. The Ace Hardware site is a mixed use high density. So this is a little lower intensity, ranging from 40 to 70, and being average or typical being about 49 dwelling units per acre. As we go through the next several slides, there's going to be quite a few of these that are looking at this mixed use high density. So this 49 DUs per acre is common for the next number of properties we're going to look at. This site at almost 2.5 acres would provide 120 units. G is Gregory Gardens on Contra Costa Boulevard, just south of Dory, north of Doris. This is where the grocery outlet is located currently. Now, some mixed use projects, you can build grocery stores into the bottom floor. So that would be a potential and very good reuse of the site to get a new structure in here and then also incorporate more residential use. This site is fairly shallow, so it'll take some challenges to get the number of units in there. And for something like this, we will also need to review with the owners what the lease agreements are. We have to make sure that this could be accomplished within the 8-year planning period. So when I said earlier that we had more units than we need, that's before we've checked with all these different units, checked on the lease arrangements, and checked that these can all be fruitful endeavors for this cycle. But this would produce up to 175 units, plus the lower floor commercial. The Salvation Army site, again on Contra Costa Boulevard, and this is pretty much in the same kind of area. We looked at this for mixed use high density, but the issue here is that the property was just a little bit over 1/4 of an acre. And at this size, the state doesn't consider this to be suitable for high density development. With that, the General Plan Advisory Committee opted to remove this from consideration. So this is currently not part of our proposal. Site I is corner of Gregory and Pleasant Hill. It's actually on 3 of the corners. It's an intriguing site, and GPAC had a lot of conversations about this. At 6.3 acres, it provides opportunities, but it was also discussed the fact that the Walgreens is a fairly new building. This may not happen in the short term, but it does provide some opportunities for live, work, eat, dine, shop kind of components within this active little core. So it's something we're looking at. It could produce, if the whole thing redeveloped, it could produce 309 units, again with commercial on the bottom floor. J is a Gregory Lane, Contra Costa Boulevard intersection. Pancake House may be the common reference to the corner piece there in the southeast corner. This at 2.35 acres, we've extended a little bit further to the north to include the Sun Valley Inn at the north side, but this could provide up to 115 units. Jewel Lane neighborhood is something that has been looked at for redevelopment long-term. A lot of apartments in the general area, the single-family homes on this site, 7 in fact, and could develop up to 71 units, accounting for the 7 homes that would be removed. So you can gain 71 units, in other words. Site L is the Beatrice area along Cleveland Road. And this area has some challenges to it in that it has some potential flooding on the site. It's 8.45 acres. There are a few houses that are on the property on the east side along Cleveland Road. The GPAC recommended that we continue to review this and kind of hold it to the side. And if we need to use it, maybe bring it into the inventory. But if there are challenges with the flood zone and getting that cleared in the 8-year period, that it may not be our first priority to look at. M is called the Monument Triangle area. It doesn't look too much like a triangle now. It was larger when we first started with it. This is over again on Monument Boulevard on the east side of the highway. Got a mobile home park to the very north, which we originally had included in the site, which was why it was more of a triangle. We've taken the mobile home park, given concerns about relocation of a number of lower income households. So this site, as currently outlined, is 4.5 acres and could develop up to 220 units. And the final one is site N. It's the former JCPenney furniture store. This one is also looked at the 49 views per acre for an assumed number. And if we reuse this one, we would gain 281 units. And again, keeping commercial on the bottom floor. So we're trying to, through this mixed use, to encourage the maintenance of a commercial core along Contra Costa Boulevard, but we're also bringing more people into the boulevard so that we have a more active streetscape. We have more shoppers that are local, provide a different kind of customer for commercial revitalization along the overall Contra Costa Boulevard corridor. So this is our breakdown. On the very top, you got the 6-cycle arena, and the bottom is the difference. So right now we have 1,200 more units than we need to provide in lower income, but it's considered that a number of these sites may not be able to be done within the 8-year period. So this will be refined down. As I mentioned, this was our first cut through this with the GPAC, and we wanted to get public's input on these properties so that we can get your feedback on which sites are considered by yourselves as being viable, something that should be reconsidered. And certainly we'd be interested in knowing if there are other sites and other locations that you think we should look at as part of the project. So with that, we were hoping to open up for public questions and comments. So for tonight, we've got a number of people online, and we're at 6 o'clock, so we still have some time here to get a good number of you to provide comments. If you agree with somebody else, just make note of that as you make your comments going forward, and in hopes of getting everybody to have their ability to say their piece. As brief as you feel is appropriate to get the information across. So there should be a raise hand feature on your screen. So if anybody has something they'd like to say, raise their hand and we can recognize you, then you could unmute your microphone.
And for those people maybe new to this, you go to the reactions button at the very bottom of your screen. And then as part of the stuff that comes up, you'll see raised hand at the bottom of the little box that pops up. So that would be how you raise your hand.
Darcy?
Hi, guys. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I just want to say, I realize you're kind of in a crunch here and you've got to come up with a lot of properties and a lot of places to put people. And I appreciate that. But let me tell you, you've made so many bad decisions in the past that should have been low to moderate income housing. And instead you invited a CarMax and you invited a boutique hotel developer from LA for the Black Angus site. You're letting multi-million-dollar homes go in at the old library with ADUs under an HOA. Oh, I'm sorry, it's an ice cream truck. And within that, you know, the city doesn't maintain the lights or the streets, so you skated around that. And I just think you're making a lot of bad choices, and now you're under the gun. You can't possibly think that you're going to tear down Lou Mangini's historic home. You've already not realized your historic element. It's been 10 years. We've been asking and asking. I did send you an email tonight about the Historical Society folding because of your, I don't want to use the word I'm thinking, your inability to even share a spot in your new library. I mean, you're just making bad choices. And I realize, we got 8 years, we got a lot of time to look. You're going to have to come up with some new ideas and some better ideas. And you're going to have to try to do something like a tiny community that's for everybody. And it's cute and it's charming. Your multi-use project, it's okay if you have to under the gun. But when I'm looking at the Salvation Army property and the old Ace Hardware property and the old grocery outlet, I mean, you're just going to be cramming people in. You don't have the infrastructure to even support that. You can't even get down Contra Costa Boulevard. It's a disaster. So I'm going to give everybody else a chance to talk, and I hope we come back and revisit this. But you have to, at some point, implement your historic housing where you were looking at everything that Valley Joe asked you to do, that the Historical Society asked you to do. You aren't doing it. I had a friend mail me from Oregon the paperwork of all the historic houses that you guys have just let been bulldozed. You're not even paying attention. And I know that isn't what this is about, but this is a piece of it. You need to recognize for sure Lou Mangini's. You already screwed up with the Molino house. You ask the wrong people the wrong questions and you'll get the answer you want, which is not to tear down anything historic. And with that, I'm going to listen as I clean out my garage. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And if you can remute your microphone so we don't get background from everybody.
Okay,
Then we'll
I'm
go
trying.
on to, thank you. And we'll go on to Martin G.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Karen. My name's Karen Panico. It's under my husband's ID. So this is my first foray into this committee. And so all of this was very new. I have to say, I appreciate the organization. It was very, very clear. But I too, like I guess Darcy, very concerned about some of these options. And I would even say maybe there's some new things to consider, even though I think Darcy's points were valid about total congestion in some of these locations. And something that comes to mind that's changing kind of everywhere is parking. And I noticed you had identified the DVC parking, but that Sun Valley Mall is just kind of sitting there and it's just all parking. And I don't know what the considerations were before, but there's a lot of parking that we're not going to need in 8 to 20 years. And we should be thinking about either converting them directly. Maybe we don't knock them down, but there's a lot of creative stuff going on in that arena in many cities and really kind of around the world as we start talking about driverless cars and things like that. So we really should be considering parking lots. Plus, I don't know what's happening with that mall. Again, this is my first foray into all this, but that mall can't be here for much longer either.
Just a quick comment. The Sun Valley Mall is in Concord. That doesn't fall in Pleasant Hill. So that's not within Pleasant Hill city boundaries.
Fair, thank you very much.
Oh, sure.
But we certainly can look at other parking. I mean, we shouldn't really be driving to certain locations. But, and then of course, I think there's a lot of these locations that are not terribly realistic, like the Walgreens, you said it's brand new. It's some of these areas are pretty congested for what the street sizes are. And we really need to think about creating destinations and not just jamming housing in.
Thank you very much. Mr. Prozac?
Good evening. This is Jack Prosek. I live near College Park High School, just west of there. First of all, I want to start out and, compliment the efforts so far on the basis that you are trying to preserve our single-family residential areas and looking at developing areas that are now commercial and other uses. I think that's a very important part of maintaining the goals that the City Council has set forth some over the last many number of years. One thing I was surprised about in your presentation was that we had some discussion at the last meeting on Site G, which is Gregory Garden Shopping Center, about expanding that site to the west, or that area that would be included in the zoning effort there. My frustration at the moment is that I've before, during, and after in emails and in person, the June meeting, I requested several types of information. First being a list of the vacant properties that you're studying and the densities and number of units that you're proposing to put on each of those. Secondly, last time we got up to 8 densities. It looks like the lowest one you've now bumped up from 3 point something to 4.8 on the Mangini property, a portion of that. But there was some indication that some of these figures are the last time you used single figures, and now you're indicating on most of these a range of values rather than a single figure. It would be helpful to know what the range of values is for each of those densities. It also, I think for the general public, would be very helpful if you could clarify what these various density levels look like. In other words, 4.8 could be single family detached, and certainly 100 units per acre is going to be perhaps a 10-story building, or maybe even more, in order to get that number of units on a site. That's a huge range. I suggested grouping those into things like 3 to 5 stories, 5 to 7, 7 to 10, and over 10 stories, to be representative of to give us a real flavor for what that looks like. And the other, well, 2 things. I see you added multi-use on the site E, which was the JFK University, which was previously shown as just being all residential, and ditto for site N, the J.C. Penney's site. We certainly don't want to lose jobs and defeat the efforts to have housing near jobs. And lastly, I had requested a spreadsheet to show how you got to the various, to the spreadsheet on the last page of the exhibit for your last meeting. There's a huge gap between going from the individual sites and into the chart showing the total number of units. And I will conclude my comments with that. I've sent emails to cover all these issues. They've gone to Troy, to Ken, and at least one of them has gone to Sue. So I don't know how to break through and get the information that we're seeking. Thank you.
Very much. Talk to Alex Budadad.
Hi. How's everybody doing? So my thought is, I've listened to folks talking about, especially on Contra Costa Boulevard. I do agree. It's already has congestion there, and trying to build complexes on that street is something that we really need to be very mindful about, that it doesn't, turn out to be a disaster. I really think that ADU needs to be more. There needs to be a better awareness of ADU for folks wanting to build in their backyard. I understand that building material, everything has gone up 300-400% in the last year. But if there's some sort of fund or something to help these folks to be able to build units in the back, so that way, you have other folks living here. So when you guys talking about congestion, when you have property that's already there, but you have a big backyard and you're able to build another unit in the back and rent it out. I think that would be something that we need to really think about also too. And one of the beauty of Pleasant Hill that it's kept its character of a family-oriented town. A lot of cities, you got the mixed use, the commercial downstairs and the residential upstairs, and it's, to me, I just feel like they're popping up all over the place, which is, I understand we need to generate revenue. I'm a business owner myself too. I understand it. We need the money for the city, but at the same time too, is to be able to be very mindful and not to get too carried away, to lose the character of our city, because this is one of the reasons why a lot of folks love living in Pleasant Hill, is because of that family oriented, the character, the style, the look of the city, and not to turn it into a huge commercial area. So that's just my thought. But I think we really need to get the word out more on the ADU with a lot of folks that are in Pleasant Hill. And, the baby boomers, as they're getting up there in age, a lot of those homes are coming on the market and they're being sold. So there's going to be more inventory on the market, but whoever that's purchasing them, it just being able to understand that they can build in the backyard, because if they're buying a house in Gregory Garden, a 3-bedroom, 1-bath for $1 million, and they're wondering how they're going to be able to, make the mortgage, maybe, they can understand that they can build in the backyard and be able to rent that out to help them out. So that's just a thought.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next person was Max Davis.
Hi. Yeah, I really like the focus on mixed use development. I think you guys did a good job going through it, finding those sites. I do worry a little bit about just if those are existing businesses that are profitable and people are doing well, especially some of those sites that have like 10 businesses on them. Even though I guess they could all be owned by the same one property owner, but if they're profitable, they people might be resistant to selling it to a developer to make a big difference. So I'm worried a little about that. I encourage you to definitely make sure those owners are actually willing to sell before it gets onto this list, or maybe putting. I've heard that for RENA numbers, putting in like a 80% confidence number, for each site, how confident are you exactly, like 50%, 80%, and then factoring that into the math seems like a good idea for those. And then like, I guess addressing like other people's concerns, like the really common concern about like congestion and parking and stuff. Like mixed use development is actually going to in some ways reduce parking. If the option is to put it out on the edge of the city versus putting the housing like near along these major routes like bus routes and near BART, you're actually going to have a lot less traffic. So I think you all in the presentation could probably maybe do a better job of like talking about like the impact fees and things like that. Like with these developments, if they're along a bus route, then probably it actually would overall reduce traffic if people can walk to shops and things like that. I think that's really important to like making the case for these things, which are great. I think, yeah, I really like that you guys focused on the mixed use development. Was that all I had? Yeah, because like a lot of cities, like I don't know if Danville recently extended their urban growth boundary, like they're going out into their hills, like getting rid of green space because that's where they'd rather build housing. So I mean I would much rather the housing be built in the city so that we can preserve those green spaces for hiking and biking and walking. So yeah, I think, yeah, looking forward to seeing the next steps. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I had a text earlier from Ellen Bade. Did you wish to say something?
Yeah, hi, thank you. A couple of comments came to mind. Wendy also might want to make her own comments. So when looking at the presentation, I had some thoughts. Some of these older commercial centers are, one aspect of them that it might be something to plan for as to become modern mixed use is a lot of the old commercial centers have cheaper rents, and they're, from an economic standpoint of small business, they can be a little easier for those small businesses as opposed to the new centers that tend to have more corporate clients. So that's something to sort of plan for if those developments happen. I am concerned about congestion and parking, I think parking, you know, it's going to be a complex issue that will have to be addressed on those, on those. But then I had some specific comments about some of the specific sites. First of all, I wanted to thank you for removing Chilpancingo from consideration. I really feel like that site should not, you know, it's the right choice to remove it. It's got probably 25% of our heritage Valley Oaks, and it is deed restricted when it was given to the park district. Other issues, the Beatrice Road site will have significant stormwater and flooding conveyance issues, as you mentioned. I'm glad you brought them up tonight. I think that they weren't necessarily listed in the table of that was in the notes. Sites like Winslow, Mangini, and Beatrice also have some of our last remaining open creeks that could be planned for. They should be, if those sites are developed, we should have creek corridors that have public access with perhaps restored riparian areas, trees, and as an open space component to those developments, I think they'll actually really enhance the property value as well as be beneficial to whatever residents live there and what businesses might locate there. They can be real assets. We don't have very many open corridors that the public can access for our creeks in Pleasant Hill. So many of them are channelized. I really would like to see on the general plan maps for this kind of information that the creeks actually be located on the map so people see them as natural resources that we're planning for. And of course, as you know, the general plan has lots of different elements that we're planning for that can sometimes be mutually contradictory or conflicting with each other. So it's a complex issue to kind of plan around those. So we have to think about all of those elements. Let's see, I think that with the increase in density in a lot of these sites, one of those issues in the general plan, and I think it's Open Space and Parks 2.6, says that we should have 3 acres per 1,000 residents within, and those of open space, and that open space should be within 1 mile of the residence. So if you plan for open space corridors in some of those sites that I mentioned, perhaps that can help meet that. But we're also going to have to be thinking about open space and parks. If we increase the density to this extent, it could affect other aspects of our general planning. I think that that's what I have for now. I appreciate the issues that you're dealing with what the state has handed us. And I look forward to participating in more of the GPAC going forward. And we can just stay on and Wendy can make her comments right now if you want. Thank you.
Fine. I wanted to point out for everybody too, when we talk about like the Mangini site and the density, that wouldn't mean that it's going to be a bulldoze and fill kind of operation, because creek protections were a big deal as far as our first charrette. And we would imagine that this could be developed by still having protections that you outlined. And the other key advantage, the fact we're doing this housing element with the other elements, is that our natural resource element can talk about creek protections at the same time that's built into the housing. So they're not mutually exclusive. I think we could still achieve some of the items you're talking about.
Hi, I'm Wendy. I've lived in Pleasant Hill since 1980, and I'm in the southern part of the area down by the Poets Corner area. I wanted to say that the other day I was listening to the news, and there was a survey out from US News and World Report that said that since the COVID epidemic happened, the survey found that 57% of the people wanted to move to a smaller, lower density areas and move out of big, high density cities. Now I know that the city has these RHNA numbers that they have to meet, and so that's kind of a problem for the city to figure out where to put everybody. With all this in mind, I think there's some other collateral type of issues that will need to be addressed with the all of this building that's going to be going on. One of them is schools. You know, if you build 1,800 units, there's going to be some kids that come into the school districts. The schools are already quite impacted. So I think there needs to be looked at where would the new schools be built or how they would be added onto. And childcare is another big issue that's being talked about. You know, 2 people have to work to afford these houses, so people need a place for childcare that's convenient and affordable. Another thing is the open space that Alan mentioned. The general plan now on open space 2.6, 2.7, and 2.8 requires 3 acres of open space per 1,000 residents within a mile. So, you know, if a lot of this development is going into the southern part, or it looks like at least the most dense is, I think we need to start looking at where open space needs to be. People, if they're living in apartments, are going to need a place to have a birthday party, have the kids ride their bikes, walk the dog. You just can't, you know, put in a 4-story building and then sidewalks. It's just not as livable as, you know, which is why I think people want lower density. Another thing is transportation. I think that, you know, if you're going to put high density housing in, you need to look at the bus routes and whatnot. I know that in the pipeline that New Cleveland Road development was put in, and that was put in because it was a transit village. But when you really look at it, the only bus route that goes by there is Route 18. It doesn't run on the weekends. It runs once every 8 minutes, and I believe
80 minutes.
once every 80 minutes, and it's from like 6:30 in the morning until 8 at night. We had to give some poor woman who was working over at the one of the healthcare facilities on Patterson a ride to the BART station because it was Saturday and she had come from Fremont to help out because they were so short-staffed, and she had no way to get to the BART station because the bus only runs Monday through Friday. So I don't know. I think that needs to be looked at a little bit more carefully when you do plan for higher density, that they really do have to have public transit. Also, another issue I wanted to bring up is the state is requiring everybody to have solar on new development, houses and whatnot. I think it needs to be kept in mind that if you want to put a 4-story building or a 3-story building next to somebody who has a 1-story building and they're put on solar or are required to put on solar, that there might be shading issues to take into consideration. You put in $20,000 to $25,000 on a solar system on your roof, either to because you're required to or because you already have, and then someone comes in and puts in a building and shades you out. Well, there goes your total investment. Another thing I wanted to mention, like Alan said, was creeks. None of the creeks are listed on any of the maps that are in the housing development or any place else. I think it needs to be something that's considered during development because there will be flooding and other issues. So at least put the creeks on the maps so that we can see where they are and consider that a constraint to the building site. And like Jack said, I think that it would be a good idea to give people an idea of the heights that we're talking about when we're talking about these densities. And I think that's about all. I probably ran out of time, but thanks a lot. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank both of you for your comments. I didn't have anybody else raising their hand. Again, if you're on phone or other devices, you can see the raise hand reactions, or if you're on a computer, if you click on the participants button, you'll see a raise hand over on that side. Was there anybody else that hasn't had a chance to speak that would like?
And if you don't see the reaction button at the bottom, you could feel free to drop in the chat and say you'd like to speak. I can always unmute you or call your name.
Councilman Carlson.
So just real quick, because I appreciate all these comments and this is why we're having this workshop is, and I'm always the doom and gloom person. You know, the state, well, ABAG and MTC have handed us this number of 1,800. And what we are looking for are ideas. So when you stop and you look at the map and you look at the makeup of our city, it's where do we build to put in these required number of units? And it's not that we're going to build them. I mean, granted, we have to entice developers to come. We need to form partnerships to build low-income housing. And we've done some of that. But so when we're very, very fortunate this time to be able to do this in such a way that we're doing our general plan and our housing at the same time. And we're also looking at our design guidelines, which is going to give us a variety of opportunities. But what we're looking for here is we have very limited space to work with. And we have to be very protective of the tax base of our community, because that's where the money comes from to provide the services that we need to provide to the community. So what I'm asking for is, given these very tight constraints and the mandates that have come out of Sacramento, and in order to defend ourselves from further mandates coming out of Sacramento, because it has been a scary 2 years and this legislative cycle continues to be scary. We're looking at things like SB 9, which could, for all intents and purposes, turn my single family home lot into a fourplex. And I don't know that my neighbors would really appreciate it. But again, it would help the housing. So what we're looking at is coming up with these innovative ideas, and they're out there, but we want to hear it from you, is how do you want us to manage that? No, we don't want to build 10-story buildings necessarily, but would a 10-story building fit in a certain part of our city? Or do we find other ways to do it? We cannot rely strictly on ADUs, and we need to be able to show that we're doing our part, so that when I go to Sacramento and say, look, we're doing our part, stay out of our business, we want to have control over how it looks, how it fits, and how we can preserve Pleasant Hill in the best way possible. So I really would like to hear a few more ideas about, yeah, how do we fit this round peg into the square hole? Because it's not easy. So thanks. I didn't mean to be the doom and gloom.
Thank you. Our next one up, the name on the tag is Martin G.
Hi there. To Ken Carlson, I guess it was your point. I was wondering this is Karen Panico, by the way. I was wondering if you could explain what the next steps are, because Ken just spoke to neat ideas. What's the timeline for that? What's the timeline for this? Because a lot of people had a lot of questions about a lot of things. So what's the timeline for getting back to people, for getting you new ideas, and for when this goes to Sacramento, or when Sacramento comes back and says, no, you don't actually need 1,800 because everybody's actually leaving the state. And then to the people about the open space, you know, kind of understanding all of that. So what, can you lay out maybe at a high level, or if you already have that, the timeline? Again, I am new to this, so I apologize if that is something that's known by everybody else.
Okay, well, we can let Brent have a shot at answering that for next steps.
You want me to jump in here?
Sure, go ahead.
Sure, I'll take it from here. So next steps is we take the information that's presented in the PowerPoint tonight that has all these different sites, all these different considerations. The PowerPoint we're going to upload onto the general plan website. It's going to be uploaded onto the city website along with this presentation that we are recording. It'll be up for about 3 to 4 weeks. Could be up longer. It just depends. And at that point, what we're going to do is we're going to solicit community feedback on the presentation. We're going to and on the site selection. So we're going to take feedback via the general plan website. We can also coordinate with Troy and the planning department of the other methods that members of the public can submit feedback. And as Councilmember Carlson has said, this is the opportunity to lay out all of your ideas. beyond what we have here. I mean, this is a community-driven effort. I know we're kind of under the thumb of the state, but any way that you can provide what your expectations are and other options that maybe we did not see or consider, this is that opportunity. So after that public comment period, what we're going to end up doing is bringing all of that feedback back to the General Plan Advisory Committee, the GPAC, at their next meeting, which has not yet been determined, but that there will be noticing for that meeting that we'll collaborate with the city on. We're going to bring back all the feedback, and then the GPAC will consider the community feedback and what the next steps are on an approach to these sites that fold into the overall general plan land use alternative as part of the general plan update, which is running in tandem to the housing element. So next steps, we have public comment period, about 3 to 4 weeks. After that, all the public comments go to GPAC for review. That's a public meeting, so everybody can attend that. And then there'll be a determination and a recommendation from the GPAC on what the next step is for site selection. And from there, it'll move its way up the chain to Planning Commission and then eventually City Council. Rick can provide some other steps on the housing element itself, since these two processes are running in tandem. So Rick, do you want to talk about what the next steps of the housing element are beyond the site's inventory analysis?
Well, I highlighted before, and so Brent laid out that for those of you who'd like to comment on the site's analysis, provide your comments within the next 3 to 4 weeks, and then we'll be able to bring those in front of the GPAC again so they can make some final determinations about sites. Now, the sites will continue to evolve as we go forward because we need to check with some property owners about their capabilities or interest in doing this. We have to look at some centers that have lease agreements and whether they could actually happen. I think Mr. Davis had mentioned before, we should look at the percentage chance of these going forward. Well, from the state standpoint, you can't include anything that you don't think has a 100% chance it could happen. Now, nothing's inevitable, but you have to tell the state that we think this is ready to go and could happen in the next 8 years as far as we know. So that's why we don't characterize them as far as percent chances, because the state won't accept them. But it is a good idea, but that's not how the state works. So as we go forward to this, we're going to look at the site assessment. We're also going to look at the constraints that have to do with this, that are man-made as well as natural constraints. We talked about creeks and how those play into the overall availability. Look at historic resources, look at high fire hazard areas, look at the ability to serve as far as infrastructure capabilities. So there's a lot more checks and balances we have to go through as far as the first cut at the sites. Long term, this housing element, as well as the rest of the general plan, will go through an environmental impact report. Some of the topics you all talked about, for instance, schools. While we can support the school district, we can't dictate to the school district what they do with their business. We can't tell them where they have to put a school. That's their choice. What we can do is be supportive. We can tell them where we think there's somewhere to go. We can tell them how many people we expect to have come in. And the environmental impact report will look at what we think is going to be our student generation rates and look at the capacities of the schools, look at the sites we're looking at, and provide an environmental impact assessment of the impacts on the school district. So that's how that kind of all rolls together. Even things that we don't quite control, we can look at how that might happen. Transit is another popular topic. We can't dictate the location of a bus route or either how often they should go, but we can sort of work with them on making it better. Some of these mixed use centers and higher densities allow us to have more population at a stop and therefore make it more economically viable to serve some of these locations. So Contra Costa Boulevard, although it seems a little contrary, the little additional density may get a better bus route, which can help to reduce the car loads on some of that property. And these are all things that we still have to look at as going forward. So these sites we've shown you are not done deals. We've still got a lot of homework to do on all of them. We'll look, while we don't lay out a site per se, so when we look at the farm property and the creeks, we don't lay it out how it might be. That's for a developer in the future. But we can look at, if we provided a corridor around this creek, what's the remaining property size? What would that building be like at this kind of density? How would this all kind of work together to be viable? So we do get into that kind of stage. The actual layout will come later when somebody looks to build the property. As part of the general plan, things talked about shadowing and impacts of that. We can talk about shadowing in our general plan policies and what we look at to help protect solar access to properties or the lack of shading on properties. And that's part of a design component that a general plan can provide general guidance on. So our next steps, we will go through and look at all those constraints. We also have to look at a big deal with the state and the current cycle of general plans is look at what they call affirmatively furthering fair housing, or fair housing for short. And that is, it looks at a whole bunch of things. Are we providing adequate access to opportunities for lower income properties? You know, are they just being put next to the freeway? Do they have access around the community? Do they have a good living environment that we're putting these individuals in? And is it equivalent to other areas of the town and other developments of the town? We're providing housing that's a good fit for everybody that would like to live in the community. Somebody mentioned ADUs. We'll have, as we move from a sites analysis, we'll look at the constraints and impediments. We look at the impediments from the city side. How long does it take to get an approval? Are there certain types of development that could be fast-tracked or made administrative reviews in order to make them more affordable and make them more assured as far as getting forward? So we have to go through and look at all the constraints from a governmental side as well. We then move on to the development of the element, which, like other elements, has to it a big existing conditions piece. The housing element has quite a bit of existing conditions. So we'll look at all the demographic factors. Who is in the community? What are their incomes? What is the affordability of housing within the community? What does a family of 4 with a area of median income earn, and what kind of housing could they afford if you look at a 30% housing budget? So we look at that as well. Many communities, and some people talked about the number of stories that a certain density might yield you. There's some, we can certainly give you some options on that, but the thing about height is it depends how big the units are. Some parts of affordability and many places and communities are pushing towards having smaller unit sizes in order to meet smaller family sizes for some individuals and lower rents. So the height of the building depends a lot upon how big the units are within that building. So it has a definite range to it, but we will provide some information on what we could expect at these different density levels going forward. After we get that together, we're doing the goals, policies, and programs. That is a very specific system for how we get to the end that we want to get to. How do we fix the governmental constraints issues? How do we address environmental issues such as the creek setbacks or protections from wildfire danger? How do we address everything that we need to going forward from a housing standpoint? The environmental impact report comes after that. We also, during this time, have the housing element itself has got a drop dead date of January 2023, as far as when the city has to actually finally approve it and submit it for certification. Prior to that, we have a 60-day review period with the state where they'll go through our element and tell us all the things we need to do to make it fully meet expectations. And I don't know of any community that hasn't had a letter back from them during that 60-day period of things we need to fine tune. That's all fine. But we go through a 60-day period, we update it, we go through public hearings. Just like all the general plan elements, the public will be welcomed and encouraged to join us at future community workshops that will include the housing element, and as well as public hearings that are going to be held with the Planning Commission and the City Council. So your input will be directly heard and used at both the workshops as we develop the plan and in the hearing process to fine tune those plans before we actually submit something to the state. So that's kind of the run of where we're going, but the January 2023 is a hard and fast date that we cannot miss because there's implications to not making our deadline from the state. They cut off, they could potentially cut off our funding. They could potentially make us go through this whole effort every 4 years instead of every 8, all sorts of fun stuff. So we're gonna make it on time. Hope that answered it. A little long-winded, but that's kind of where we're going. As we come up with new GPAC meetings, you can see them on the project website, pleasanthill2040.com, and all the meetings are posted there. The GPAC meetings are posted there. Brent mentioned earlier, the public is welcome to sit in on those meetings and listen, and there's a public comment component to each of those meetings. So your voice can be heard at those meetings as well as future workshops as we go forward.
I think Alan raised his hand again.
Just real quick, Sue, once you go to the website, you can sign up for notifications and you will get email notifications of meetings and everything that's going on. So sign up for the newsletter and the notifications.
Alan, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for that, Rick, because knowing that we have a time period, you know, very often for me personally, at least, I need to absorb the information in a workshop like this. And then, you know, Ken's calling for ideas and input and things like that. And so I need to absorb it and then come back. And I think we'll plan on writing some letters and giving some more feedback with links. Are there links going to be posted on the Pleasant Hill 2040 website for how to provide those comments? Because I definitely have more thoughts after absorbing all of this information. And I think, you know, you've done a lot with a very difficult situation, and I'll you know, probably want to comment more on that. So thanks for the explanation about the time frame and how to continue to participate. We missed the last GPAC meeting because we were on vacation, but we've tried to participate all the way through. They've been good meetings. So.
And I just want to note that, you know, all that work, and Alan, I know you and Wendy participated a lot when we did the charrette, all that input and information regarding the creeks and line, those are all still with us. This is, you know, another piece we have to address, but we haven't forgotten those pieces. And we have those lovely drawings that we did in those charrettes where we were laying out, you know, the protected creek in the Mangini area and things like that. So we haven't forgotten any of that information, but we are asking for additional input now because it has been a while. And the numbers back then when we were doing those charrettes weren't anywhere close to what we're looking at now. So we have to do a little rethinking while at the same time focusing on those things. The other thing that I would encourage people to do is, you know, congestion is a problem, parking, transit. I sit on the County Connection Board, I sit on CCTA, I sit on Transpac, which is our regional transportation. And I have to tell you, I bring this up a lot. Whenever they're focusing on getting through traffic on 680, they spend a lot of time trying to improve 680 and 4. That will help a lot get some of the traffic off our streets, but it doesn't help all the congestion. And so, you know, I continually bring up in those meetings, let's not just focus on the highway, but also focus on the routes of significance or the causes of congestion within the cities. That's just as important to so many people. So, you know, realize that what we're hearing here is not only for this, but it also goes back with many of us to the committees that we participate on elsewhere in the county to talk about those issues and concerns. So it's not just that. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
And I do want to reiterate too that I know this has been brought up several times this evening, but the Pleasant Hill 2040 website has a section where you can sign up. I highly recommend that you sign up through that process. You get notifications for every public meeting, any deliverable that we submit for public review. We will provide avenues for additional public feedback on tonight's meeting. And I typically get asked, if I sign up for that, do I really get something? And do you really know? And I can say there's several of you on the screen now that have currently signed up because I am personally getting the emails. So we do see you. And we do notice that. So I highly suggest going there and signing up.
I think Jack has got his hand raised again.
Yes, thank you. What opportunities, if any, does the city have for the areas that are within its sphere of influence outside the city boundaries?
You know, that they can't be part of our housing element, Jack. The county, that's factored into the county's control. Pleasant Hill only can deal with our city boundaries.
Within the city limits, okay.
Within the city limits. So, you know, we can't say, well, we've got this sort of open space in the unincorporated. Yeah. we can't do that, I'm afraid. It's just within our city boundaries.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make a point on the ADUs. ADUs are fantastic. And we have had some discussions about how to make that process easier. There are some cities that have done sort of approved ahead of time drawings, so that are architectural plans, so that if you use one of those, they're sort of automatically done if you meet certain guidelines. We've talked about some of that stuff. We'll continue to talk about some of the stuff. Realize though that with ADUs, we cannot require parking. So people can build ADUs in the area of, let's say, Poets Corner, but we can't require additional parking. So just realize that we also have a balancing act there on ADUs, that we could end up with a lot of ADUs and unable to require parking, and there'll be more parking on the street. So again, it's one of those balancing acts that we're going to have to look at closely.
And just to echo what Mayor Nowak said here about ADUs, I also want to point this out. So the densities that we're showing as part of these sites, the state does not apply density to ADUs. So if your site, it allows 70 units to an acre and individuals want to put ADUs, the ADU does not count as a dwelling unit. So they're exempt from that. So ADUs can surpass what the allowable density is on property. So I just want to make that clear as well, that there's a different distinction between those types of units.
If I could say something here, we got a sign up from Max Davis and Landon Browning. If you could do it one more time, our system wasn't accepting email addresses, so it came in blank. So if you could do me a favor and do that again, I've got the software fixed while we're on the line here, so appreciate it. Don't want you to be missing out. Well, let's see. Ellen Bade, you've talked a couple times already, so we'll flip it over to Darcy first. Go ahead. Darcy?
Why is some housing just for seniors and not inclusive for all? Like, in my opinion, that's like saying you can't live here if you're Asian. Well, what about families? Because I'm not saying all old people are rich, but all the old people I know are rich and don't need help. I'm sure there are plenty of people who need help, but I see more of families and upcoming really, really struggling, and to pay $2,000 rent for a dump on Detroit is ridiculous. So why is the housing that's up off Golf Club Way, why isn't it housing for all? And why isn't every project from this day forward housing for all? That would be my question.
The one on Golf Club Road is part of the Choice in Aging campus. And there's wraparound services to assist those seniors as part of the Choice in Aging. That's why that project is senior citizens only. That's not to say everything like that is, but that is the reason for the 490 Golf Club Road project being low-income seniors.
And I guess I did know that. I'm just using that as an example. I just know, seriously, everybody I know, and my sphere of friends, it should be for the next generation. They're the ones that are really, really, really struggling. And they're the ones that are going to be homeless when this moratorium lifts and they can't pay their rent. And I know it's going to take years and years to catch up. But I keep thinking again, at the Black Angus site, had you guys made a different decision, that could have been tiny homes. That used to be a motel back in my day when I was a kid. And it should just be a tiny home community. I will tell you, about 4 years ago, I was down there looking at plans for something, and a developer came in, and I was very rude to him, and I asked who he was. And he said, I was here to try to develop a tiny home community on the Black Angus site. And he was basically told by city council, I can quote this, to pack sand and leave. His project would never come to fruition. And I can see now, looking back on all the notes and documents, that yes, indeed, that's when Troy said in that meeting, thank you for inviting us up. So I get it, it's through the tax dollar. I get it, it's for the money, but really it should be for the people and the community. And, a lot of us already have ours, but you don't really need another hotel. You guys need to learn to go within your means. I'm the person who never went to Starbucks and never got her hair done. It's not about me. It's about the next generation. You guys need to learn to live within your budget and do better, try harder. I'm still fit to be tied over the Molino $1 million homes. That should have been a tiny house community. You could have put way more homes in there. Even if you have to go as far as have a central kitchen, think small, think another country, think think how people make it work, and don't think about hotels and CarMaxes, and think for every project here on out, think about family, not just seniors. Okay. And thank you.
So real quick, sorry. I like Jack, and so Rick, I don't think it's doable, and I've struggled with this kind of through the whole thing, but how to visualize density and all that, because every site is different. We don't know how the developer is going to offer up what they're doing, but it is kind of challenging to kind of visualize a certain size parcel, certain size density, and then how that would look in my own mind. So I struggle like others, I think, because I'm very visual on how that's going to work. So I mean, if there's some way in this whole process, we can kind of provide some type of visualization of how that works, it'd be really appreciative. And then the other thing is, you know, and we went through this when Darcy mentioned CarMax, you know, we don't build it. We can put some barriers up, but again, we're talking in HCD here. And if we put too many barriers up and we don't do anything, there's consequences for us to pay. So we have this challenge of how do we bring the right developer to town, meet the goals and expectations of our community, meet the goals and expectations of Sacramento. It really is challenging. But again, we don't build it. We've got to find a way to get the developers either to come in and or partner with us in some way to meet all of these expectations that we're facing here. So again, a soapbox, sorry.
And relative to the state, I will tell you that senior housing is considered to be a special class of housing, and you cannot have any regulations that would stop it from being built. So if we were to discourage senior housing, the state would reject your housing element.
Alan, do you still have your hand raised, or is that still all carryover?
I think that's a carryover. I did have one comment that ADUs are really helpful, but I think that sometimes you know, they may or may not increase our very low and low density because people use them, rightfully so, to help pay their large mortgages. So they help with the component of it, of our RHNA needs, but they may not help with some of the hardest, which is the low and very low. But thanks. You can take my raised hand signal.
Yeah. And interestingly, in the you know what we were showing with all the sites and the numbers, our shortfall is actually in the above moderate housing in our planning at this point, because we have done so much mixed use. Those numbers, Brent and Rick, I think, can bring up the slide. Those numbers hit our low income numbers. They don't hit our moderate numbers. So because we don't have a lot of as you recall from all those sites, there's very little that's actually single family home density that are planned for. Most of it is mixed use or higher density. Thanks, Rick, for bringing this. Let's see. Oh, I think we got to go back the other. So you see here, see the above moderate, we're short 362, yet we're 1,000 over on the lower income planning at this point. So these are numbers we can still work around with, but I just wanted to point that out to you that at this point, that's not where we're short. It may be where we short when developers come in and make proposals. That's harder to get them built, but the way we're zoning things, the way we're proposing to zone things, we've got good numbers. Just getting developers to actually build it is a whole different situation. Anybody else has comments that hasn't spoken or would like to speak? Everybody know how to use it?
Just would encourage everybody. Yes.
Did somebody raise their hand? Sorry, I'm not seeing anybody else, Rick.
Yeah, no raise.
Okay. I want to encourage everybody to go to pleasanthill2040.com. You will see some little tags on the right side of the page. One allows you to send a comment. That's limited to 1,000 characters, so that may not fit the amount of emotion you want to convey to us or the information you'd like to convey to us. If so, you can, and Troy, did you want to provide an email address they can send to?
Yes, they can. Thanks, Rick. They can also send me an email. It's tfujimoto@pleasanthillca.org, and that's tfujimoto@pleasanthillca.org. I believe you go to our website and go to the planning division. There's also an email link there that you can send your comments in. Any of those methods will get to us. So you do have some options to provide that feedback, but please do pick one of them and send it in.
You can also obviously send it to the council members that are on here. Ken and myself get a lot of emails from people, and our emails are on the city website as well. So feel free to send them to us as well, and we'll make sure that Troy gets them, and Rick and Brent as well if there's any questions. So
Brent, you said 4 weeks for comments. So we telling them through August 11th?
That is correct.
Okay. So through however means you do it, if you can get us comments on this by the 11th of August, we'll make sure that those are presented to our GPAC members at their next meeting. And again, you'll be welcome to attend that. The date hasn't been set, but it will be posted on the website as soon as it is available.
And I will point out that the recording from tonight, as well as the individual PowerPoint that we have shown that as part of this Zoom, that will also be on the website. That'll be up Friday. We need to do some trimming of the video before it goes online, but that'll be on there. So if you want to look back at the conversation or any public comments, you can see them there.
Alex, you've got one hand raised right now, Alex.
Yes, I just had a quick question. Regarding the mixed use, are they going to be owned by the developers, or are they going to be actually individually sold so people have the prideship of home ownership, or are they going to be something where 100 units are going to be developed and it's going to turned into like an apartment complex? I'm just curious about that.
So Alex, we don't make those decisions ahead of time. Those are projects when the developers come in, they make a proposal, then we take a look at it. What we'll be doing is developing design guidelines for the different densities as to what we'd like to see, how we think those densities will fit into Pleasant Hill. And then the developers, when they make a proposal, we'll take a look. We'll take a look at how it meets the density, the design guidelines, and so on and so forth. They could be apartments, they could be condos, they could be anything. So it's, they could be townhomes instead of apartments. Again, we don't build them. We can set the zoning, we can set the design guidelines, which we'll be doing. But the developer then comes to us with a proposal, and that's when, architectural review, planning commission, and city council takes a look at them.
I'm just thinking of pride of ownership of, having owned versus a whole bunch of apartment complexes. So that's why.
Nothing, we don't lay that out ahead of time.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks,
Sure.
Sue.
So let me just conclude if there's no other comments. We really appreciate everybody's thoughts and comments and input. And I just encourage everybody to always stay involved. It's really hard for people to catch up sort of one time. We try to do as many of these things as we can and involve the public as much as we can in this. Love to get everybody's feedback, and there'll be opportunities to do that. So please sign up on the Pleasant Hill 2040 website so you get all the emails and are aware of the meetings so you can come and participate. Quite a few of you have been and have been there a lot, which has been fantastic. And I just encourage people to do that as much as possible. So everybody understands the difficulties that we're facing, but also can offer their feedback to us and their thoughts and suggestions, because we're always looking how to address some of these big challenges we do have in front of us. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate everybody's input today.